all the way to 1987, 2 volumes. And I found that's one way to alienate your committee. They were not happy. I think one of my members said he could use it to keep his barn door open. I'm like, okay, probably. And Ray O'Malley, my mentor, he was my outside member from my undergraduate days at Indiana. I remember him telling me that in this dissertation you have 3 books. Throw one of them away. So I guess I still have data that I haven't done anything with other than perhaps a couple articles. So what got me interested in the second book, the Religious Revitalization, was when I was working with elders that summer of 1987, I started learning about the ghost dance. People telling me that their ancestors had practiced it. Some had said they were confused by Christianity and new religions, and that the ghost dance was kind of a stepping stone between the sun dance and Christianity, that it had amalgamated indigenous beliefs with new beliefs. I think what really got me was when an elder played a reel-to-reel tape of a ghost dance song for me that had probably been recorded in 1950s, because people could still sing those songs. And not only did it send a chill up my spine and back down again, I never heard anything before or after like that song, but it really made me more interested. So that summer I spent 10 weeks at the Smithsonian, and I found out that in 1935 those anthropology students, who by the way all became famous and went on to work in other parts of the world, and the field notes never got published. So that's why I was able to mine them as much as I did. And those field notes had included information about the ghost dance and the early peyote religion from those individuals. I was being pretty optimistic and opportunistic, because I also, after the Smithsonian closed, because anthropology archives then were the National Museum of Natural History. Since then they moved to Maryland. But as soon as the Smithsonian closed, I would go across the street to the U.S. National Archives, and I worked there every night. And I did photocopying. I would take in rolls of nickels every night and photocopy all the documents. And I think my little Honda car barely made it back home and over the mountains that year, because I brought back so much paper with me. But I was looking at documents primarily in the early 20th century. And one of the things I have learned that has always amazed me, and most people don't know, is that time between 1883 and 1933, the government prohibited American Indian religious beliefs and practices, not unilaterally, but wherever the Indian agents or superintendents saw fit, to try to eradicate Indian customs and dances and practices. And as I discovered, some of that, what I call cultural genocide, was levied against the Kiowas and others, and to show their tenacity to maintain traditions as they did, and for some of those traditions to then blend into Christianity, and then for the Native American church to survive as it did into the present day. So that's really what inspired the second book. And I think a part of it as well is most people outside of Oklahoma don't understand how Indians can be Christians, because many of the people I've worked with are very staunch Christians. In fact, I will personally say that I probably discovered my own spirituality working with some of these elders. You know, I feel like I've been more centered. Some of you probably wouldn't know that, but I felt more centered since then working with some of these very remarkable people. One of them I have photographed in my second book, Dorothy Satoke Gray. She was one of the descendants of Hunting Horse, and she's really the most remarkable person I've ever known. Just that incredible. So that was a lot of inspiration for the second book. And it took me so long to do them because I had to go through Ray O'Malley for my first book, Ray O'Malley being my mentor. And in Indian studies and anthropology, he's probably one of the toughest people to please. And I think I had turned in chapters to him as early as 2005. And he kept on kicking it back to me. And we went from, keep on plugging away to here's some more, things, keep plugging away. And finally, it was about 6 or 7 years ago when he said, it's interesting. And then we got from that point where it's interesting to it's good. And then he went to Paris for a year on a fellowship, and it's kind of stayed there for a year, stagnant. And then back in 2014, he had a stroke. And ever since then, he hasn't been able to talk. And so the first book, we finished the last edits, Christmas of 2015. He can only say yes, no, or caca, because his speech is, he's plateaued. He's really messed up. And I was hoping the caca wasn't a critique. It was just him trying to articulate what he wanted. And so after I did the first one, the second one went a lot faster because I already had it written, and I just had to put it together. And so it didn't take more than a year to do that. So I still have some projects. I'm working on an autobiography. Henrietta Tonkame, the family that has taken me in, she lived from 1912 to 1993, and she wrote her autobiography. And I'm in the process of editing it. And next month I'm going to go out and work with or without funding. I'm going to work with a couple of the family members, and we're going to annotate it, edit it and annotate it, and present it to Nebraska Press. Now, her life was incredible because as she grew up in the 19-teens and 1920s, one set of grandparents belonged to the Native American church, the Ojibwe side, and then the other side, for her grandfather, Tanadaw, or not Tanadaw, her other grandparents were charter members of Saddle Mountain Baptist Church. So she really had it both ways. And it's really neat because she describes the Saddle Mountain community, which, if you're familiar with the Lawton area, just go north of the mountains, go north of Fort Sill, go north of the mountains toward Mears and keep on going. Saddle Mountain is where the limestone plate for the Slick Hills and the granite plate for the Wichita Mountains come together. And that's where the mission church was. That's where her other grandparent, Odapaw, and his wife lived. And so in this autobiography, she's described all the families who lived there, and talks about details of going to different schools. She went to Rainy Mountain School. She went to Anadarko in the boarding school at Riverside. She went to public schools. I think that the most interesting parts of her autobiography, she talks about her grandparents taking her to the town of Apache and having her first hamburger and orange soda in one of the stores there. And I just found that to be totally interesting. Talking about the metropolis of Gotebo, which is now a ghost town. And so I'm excited to, I've got to have another project. And I appreciate having the support. I appreciate all the people who have helped me over the years. I couldn't have done it without anyone, but without their help, all the Kiowa peoples who have helped me and will continue to help me. When I wrote my acknowledgments, I just went through and realized that so many people who worked with me are no longer here. So I feel that it was a real blessing to have those experiences. So I think I've said enough for now. I don't know what my time is, but I was hoping to keep it short. Oh, it's only 10 after? No, it can't be 10 after.
Slow to after.
Okay. I was going to say, wow, time flies, man. Well, I would rather just answer questions. You know, I just kind of wanted to document some.
The Native American church, I'm not familiar with this, so I'm a novice, I mean, at best.
Yeah.
The Native American church, that terminology I'm asking you is founded by the Native Americans or by the American government?
Okay, well, that was a name that came about in 1918. It came about in 1918. One could really trace the sacramental use of peyote probably back to the 1850s or 1870s, where the peyote, which is Wolfifora orlenza, it's a taproot cactus that grows adjacent to the Rio Grande, the Mexican side, and near Laredo, Texas. Some of the Apache groups had used it and had probably gotten it from people like the Tarahumara and the Huichil in northern Mexico. And so somehow it started as being used for divination by some of those tribes. But somewhere between the 1850s and 70s, some Comanche and Kiowa war parties came into contact with it, but it really wasn't noticed by the Indian agents until like 1885, that there are actually peyote meetings that were taking place, peyote being used as a sacrament. Okay. That helps people concentrate on their prayers. You know, if you use the word hallucination or drug, that doesn't really express what practitioners believe. The idea that it helps them to have a clearer seeing and understanding of what they're there to pray for. It's seen as a way of suffering and sacrifice. I mean, to sit in the teepee and to worship like that for 18 hours, to sit cross-legged, to have a water break at midnight, and then in the morning to eat the peyote buttons, which are pretty harsh and bitter. You know, that's seen as a lot of sacrifice and the piety that goes into their praying. But because the government was against it and didn't understand it, one of the things that happened is that peyote was miscategorized as mescal, which is a bean that grows on a different secundiflora, a bush. And it was used for different things, and people just didn't understand it. It's even been classified as a narcotic, which is totally false. And you know that since you teach those classes. So it was in 1918 where James Mooney, the anthropologist from the Smithsonian who was working with the tribes in Oklahoma and had started with the Kiowas, he went to a meeting there in Kiowa country. And in fact, one of the Oi boys was there, and he said, you all need to have yourself a religious charter and act like a white functioning church with, you know, constitution and bylaws, and call yourselves the Native American Church.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, interesting though, during the statehood convention in 1907, Quanah Parker and other Kiowas and natives from across what would become the state went and met with the legislature, and they said, you know, that we'll let it happen. But it really wasn't until that official church body was established in 1918. And kind of a sidebar to that, the missionaries And some of the Indian agents hated Mooney so much for that. And the letters I've read, they would refer to him as that ethnologist from the Smithsonian. They hated him. They set up a deal through the Interior Department and the Bureau of Indian Affairs through the Smithsonian to have Mooney physically removed from Oklahoma. So they came and took him away by force. And he was never, he lived 3 more years and was never able to come back to Oklahoma. So it's quite an interesting story. So,
Thank you for that.
Happy to share it. You said you were going to ask some tough questions, so.
Any questions?
Anybody can ask.
I think most of my questions were organized or referencing Mooney, and you kind of just like gave me a crash course of everything we know.
Yeah.
What was so bad? What did Mooney do that was so bad?
He was basically pro-Indian. You know, the fact that the missionaries thought that mezcal use was evil and that it brought about immoral behavior. And same thing with the ghost dance. When the ghost dance was attacked by the Indian agents and the missionaries, they're saying that it promoted immorality. And you know, what they're trying to do at that time was to get the Indians in that part of the state to live in houses and to work their allotments. Which really, if you consider that when the land was allotted, which is another problem, that the land was never, there was never enough land for one person to actually become a stockholder successfully. Now some were. You know, Quanah Parker was one of the successful cattlemen out of the tribes out there, but it was just so difficult to convince them that, oh, you've got to stay on your farm and you've got to work it, and that was just so new to them. And I've actually seen letters written by social workers in 1917 that were saying, we're trying to get some of these folks to live in their houses because they didn't feel comfortable living in them. You know, they're used to living in tents or teepees and moving around instead of staying in one place. So, you know, the native, the shamans, dances, any type of ceremonialism that wasn't a Christian activity, there was a lot of opposition to that from the government. So, and of course, the Native American Church was, and the ghost dance were two of the biggest targeted ceremonies and events. So, yeah.
So were there bad relations between those Kiowa who became Baptists and those who joined the Native American Church?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think there's a really easy answer for it. You know, some who took the Jesus road, as they learned it, when you take your path and it splits, you stay with the Jesus path, or if you go do something else, you're kind of deviating from that. Some anthropologists who worked there after 1935 actually believed that there were some tensions between people in the Native American Church and those who were Christians. But those differences have really, I mean, there's some people who still have those feelings. When I was doing field work 30 years ago, there were still some elders who said, you know, peyote's a drug, we don't believe in it. But I don't really hear that anymore. You know, people will just say, you know, they do their thing. And so you go to, I've been to events in the past at the tribal complex where they'll ask for elders to pray. One I was at, they had Gus Palmer give a prayer, and then they had Dorothy Gray give a prayer. And, you know, and so they were together there. But yeah, it took a while, it seems, for those differences to come about. And really, any differences today are mostly based on politics, which I won't have anything to do with, because it's not my business. And it's not very comfortable to be around those things. So